Well, tonight's Bible study, we're going to take a little diversion. Instead of going through another lesson from Psalms, I thought there was something so significant that took place this week that most Americans are ignorant of the not only the history behind the location, they're also ignorant of the mindset of many in the Middle East and what they are thinking and how they are considering what has been happening. This last week, the Israeli army, otherwise known as the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, went north up into Syria. As you know, Syria was taken over by a radical jihadist group, remnants of ISIS and of Al-Qaeda, and they are rapidly trying to do all they can to assemble themselves together to attack Israel. According to their own statements, they consider Israel an enemy. Israel has taken preemptive measures. Most of you are familiar with the many strikes against stockpiles of weapons, airplanes, and ammunition that the Syrian army under Mr. Assad had stockpiled, and the Israelis feel they've destroyed 90% of those, not wanting those to fall into the hands of basically evildoers or enemies of theirs. But in a not miraculous, but a certainly momentous event, this picture shows what happened this week. This is the top of Mount Hermon. It's in southern Syria, just across the border from Lebanon and, of course, north of Israel. These are Israeli soldiers planting the Israeli flag on top of Mount Hermon. There was a blue and white building there. I think it's probably on one of the other summits. Mount Hermon actually has three summits, kind of like Mount Rainier has three knobs. Mount Hermon has three summits. And these summits command a view all the way across much of Syria, much of Lebanon, all the way down through most of Israel. This is the command location strategically of those three nations, Israel, Syria, and Lebanon. And so having the Israelis take that position, and say they are going to stay there, sent a message throughout the Middle East that we need to understand. Now, to first give you an idea of where Mount Hermon is, many of you may be familiar with this, many of you may not. But, of course, we have Israel over here, and that's the land of Israel, then Lebanon. And, of course, Israel has already taken much of this buffer zone here to about 30 to 40 I think, kilometers into Lebanon to try to clear out the Hezbollah terrorists. Mount Hermon is up here. I've circled it, and it is 9,200 feet high. It commands all of the area of Syria to this area, all of Lebanon, and this is called, down to the south here, is the Bekaa Valley, very famous in Israeli wars. But you'll see that it is in Syria. This Golan Heights, which is right here. I've been to the Golan Heights a couple times. They were taken by Israel in 1967 because the Syrians up there were shelling Israeli villages. And in order to protect themselves, they just simply took and said, we're keeping these Golan Heights. If you can't keep your cannons off of here and your artillery, we're going to protect our people. Now, in this little area here, you'll see two squiggly red lines. Now, that is called the demilitarized zone. I've got a better picture of it. The demilitarized zone was set up by the UN in 1994. Now, here it is in blue. This kind of gives you the idea of this demilitarized zone. It separates Israel and the Golan Heights all the way up to the north, all the way up to Mount Hermon up here. And that was an area theoretically controlled by the United Nations. And the idea was to keep any Syrian or jihadist element from attacking into Israel from the area of Syria. Now, Syria had troops stationed all along this border here of the DMZ. Those troops cut tail and ran last week when Syria fell. And so Israel felt very honestly, logically, that if they did not occupy that area, very soon it would be occupied by the jihadist groups who were taking over in Syria, and their people would be threatened for another October 7th style of invasion. So what Israel has done now is this area, they are occupying much more of it. They are going way up. They're within about 12 miles of Damascus with their tanks and their soldiers, and so they have just simply decided to run their own buffer zone around the nation of Israel. And this buffer zone, by all indications, seems like where Mr. Netanyahu, president of Israel, where a prime minister where he thinks that they're going to be permanently. They're simply not going to allow this new jihadist group, these ISIS, others. By the way, today the leader of the jihadist group declared that they were perpetual enemies of Israel, and they were not going to guarantee anybody's safety. So here we have Israel sitting up here on top of the mountain. They have artillery, they have observation posts, and they are basically announcing to Lebanon and Syria and the area surrounding there, we are now king of the mountain, and we are going to dictate how things go around here militarily from now on. The many might be an exaggeration, but the 4 or 5 times that Israeli soldiers have had to stop from achieving victory because of American, British, French, and other pressure to try to negotiate, compromise with their enemies has only led to more war. We've all seen that, 67, 56, of course, 48 at the first time. Although 48, they could not have conquered anything more. They were exhausted, and they were out of soldiers. They were out of everything. But the 4 and 56, but especially in 67 and then 74, the Americans stopped the Israelis from achieving complete victory over their enemies. And so all that happened, they began to then exchange land for lies. They were told, you retreat from the land you've conquered, and we will promise you peace and prosperity and all that type of thing. So they basically were subjected to land for lie agreements for a number of years, and President Netanyahu said enough is enough after the attacks last year, especially when they saw that the Egyptians, who, according to the Camp David Accords that were signed back during Bill Clinton's term, before that, of course, during Jimmy Carter's time, that the Egyptians promised not to aid any insurrectionist or terrorist groups who were attacking Israel or who were enemies of Israel. And of course, that's all they did. They had all those tunnels between the Sinai Peninsula or from Egypt into the area of Gaza and Hamas. And 3 of the tunnels, I understand, were big enough to drive semi-trucks through. So that's how they got huge amounts of weaponry into Hamas. And of course, they would have had soldiers and volunteers and others. So Mr. Netanyahu has learned not to trust the words of his enemies. Now, a couple things we need to do. First is to look at this article. This says, why Israel captured Syria's tallest mountain just hours after Assad fell. They very quickly took over Mount Hermon. It says, Israel wasted, this, by the way, is from CNN, so they're definitely not any sort of bias towards Israel. Israel wasted no time after Bashar al-Assad's fall to bomb all the Syrian military assets it wanted to keep out of the rebels' hands. They struck over 500 targets, destroyed the Syrian Navy, and took out, according to their own claims, 90% of Syria's known surface-to-air missiles. But Israel's capture of Syria's highest peak, Mount Hermon summit, may prove to be the most lasting of prizes. Others say it's going to be temporary. I believe, my opinion, from what I've read and heard Mr. Netanyahu and others talking about it, this is going to be a permanent occupation because it says we are the king of the mountain. We have visual contact for miles and miles, dozens, 50, 70, 100 miles around, and we're going to keep an eye on everything. It says the summit of Mount Hermon, it's the highest place in the region, looking upon Lebanon, Syria, and Israel. It says it's strategically very important, and there is no substitute for it. The summit of Mount Hermon lies in Syria in a buffer zone that separated Israeli and Syrian forces for 50 years until last weekend, when Israeli troops took control of it. Until Sunday, the summit was demilitarized and occupied by UN peacekeepers, but of course they pretty much hightailed and took off. Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz, said Friday, ordered the military to prepare for the harsh conditions of winter. Mount Hermon is known as being snowy and cold in the winter. There is a ski resort there on the upper edges of the Golden Heights that the Israelis have built and let their people go up there to snow ski. Kind of think of snow skiing in Israel. It's kind of, doesn't seem to compute, but it does happen. The Israeli Defense Forces have advanced beyond the summit and as far as Baquesim, about 25 kilometers or 15 miles from the Syrian capital. So that is well within range of artillery if they wanted to destroy something in the city of Damascus. Israel captured the Golan Heights as a strategic plateau in southwestern Syria that abuts Mount Hermon in the 1967 war. It has occupied that area, the Golan Heights, ever since. Syria attempted to retake the territory in a surprise attack in 1973, but failed, and Israel annexed it as officially part of Israel in 1981. Let me continue. Israel has for decades held some lower slopes of Mount Hermon and even operates a ski resort there. Prime Minister Netanyahu said, "We have no intention to intervene in Syria's internal affairs," but he said, "We certainly intend to do everything necessary to take care of our own security," which is what they are doing. They are making an insulating barrier between themselves and their potential enemies. People sometimes say it is an age of missiles, land is not important, but he said that simply is not true. In a paper written in 2011, it says that Mount Hermon enables the use of electronic surveillance deep into Syrian territory, giving Israel early warning capacity in case of an impending attack. Advanced technological alternatives like airborne surveillance, he argued, was simply not comparable. The peak is just over 35 kilometers from Damascus, or 22 miles, which means it controls the Syrian foothills. It also has been compared to Mount Rainier because it is about 50 miles inland from the ocean. And so just like Mount Rainier is about 50 miles in from Puget Sound, Mount Hermon is 50 miles or so inland from the Mediterranean Sea. Now, a lot of people haven't been happy with this. Of course, Turkey wants to occupy Israel. In fact, today there are reports of Turkey's armies massing on the northern border of Syria. So Turkey, Erdogan, who wants to install himself as the caliph or the caliphate leader of a reestablished Ottoman Empire, which was one of the most corrupt in history. But anyway, he wants to be the caliph of that. And so it's possible there will be an attack by Turkey into Syria before the inauguration of the new president. After meeting in Aqaba, officials from Turkey, Iraq, Egypt, and even some European Commission ministers objected to Israel occupying Mount Hermon. My guess is that's not going to mean a great deal to Mr. Netanyahu. Mostly, he says, General Israel Ziv said of Israel's operations, "We have learned what happened in other countries when you have terror organizations that capture military equipment." Netanyahu has insisted that the occupation is temporary, but he said Israel will not permit jihadi groups to fill the vacuum and threaten Israeli communities on the Golan Heights. His criteria for withdrawing, he said, was a Syrian force that is committed to the 1974 agreement. But of course, that's not going to happen. We all know that. December 14th, 4 days ago, Israel's interim government has asked the United Nations, Syria's interim government asked the United Nations to intervene in Israel's occupation of the Golan Heights and Mount Hermon. That was the first act of the terrorist group that calls itself the new rulers of Syria. Guy's name is Dahak, D-A-H-A-K. He appealed to the UN and also posted on X social media platform. And of course, not a lot of reaction to that around the world because these people are certainly not yet credible. Now, this new group in Syria is called HTS. That's a kind of an acronym for their long Arabic name. In the hours after HTS led rebel forces overthrew the Assad regime on Sunday, the Israeli Defense Forces moved in to seize Mount Hermon, which offers commanding views of Damascus as well as Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, where Hezbollah militants have long held control. So he says here, if we can establish neighborly relations, that's our desire, essentially. But if not, Mr. Netanyahu says we are going to stay there. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Mount Hermon. I showed you a map of its location, but I want to talk a little bit now about its historical importance in the Bible because it is mentioned quite a number of times. The name of the majestic mountain in which the anti-Lebanon range terminates sets to the south. It reaches the height of 9,200 feet above sea level and extends some 16 to 20 miles from north to south. So it's more of a ridge with three larger peaks in the middle. It's called a various number of things. Senir by the Amorites. Some call it Mount Sion, S-I-O-N, not Zion, but S-I-O-N. It was once called the Hermons because of the three knobs or three kind of ridges that are on there. three peaks that are on the ridge. It must be a reference to these triple summits. It mentions here the Aleppo, pine, oak, and poplar are plentiful. Wolves and leopards are still found on the mountain, so it is still a somewhat perhaps undisturbed area in some ways. It was, of course, where the cedars of Lebanon grew and where many, many forests and obviously a lot of timber was cut for the building of buildings, temple, palace, whatever, in Jerusalem and throughout Israel, but also throughout other places in the Middle East. Mount Hermon is the source of many blessings to the land over which it so proudly sits. And Mount Hermon is covered in the Bible a number of times as a blessing. In fact, the oil that comes out on Aaron's beard, as it mentions in Psalms, is like the dew from Mount Hermon or Hermon. It says, refreshing breezes flow from its cold heights. Its snows are carried to Damascus and the towns all the way to the seaboard. Mentions here that under the mountains of Mount Hermon, under the bridges, there are a number of subterranean reservoirs of water that essentially spring out. If you've been to Banyas, which is the source of the Jordan River, it is a very large just spring coming out of the lower slopes there of the Golan Heights, and it does bubble into a significant little river very quickly. There's a large amount of water that comes out of there, so that's all spring clear water, and I think there are some Bible connections there. Psalm 133 and verse 3 talks about the dew clouds of Hermon, Mount Hermon, as a part of a benediction. Now, Mount Hermon marked the northern limit of Joshua's campaigns that we have record of. It was part of the dominion of Og or Bashan. With the fall of that monarch, it came under Israelite control. And of course, it is written up in a number of historical records. But some people have erroneously thought it was the Mount of Transfiguration. That's probably wrong. Mount of Transfiguration was probably over around Haifa. There are several hills there that get up into the maybe 1,000-foot range. But I would really doubt that that was where it was. It's simply too far up. The modern name of Mount Hermon is Jebel Eth Village, which means Mount of Snow. And on the map I showed you that I circled, that's what it said there, Jebel Eth Village. It's just simply a different name they gave to them. Now, the significance for us right now, we'll get into some scriptures and some background on Mount Hermon and on Judah. The mindset of many people in the Middle East is different than what we understand, because they understand that the promise to Abraham, which is also recorded in the Quran, extends from the Nile to the Euphrates. The Euphrates is roughly the northern border of Syria, although it's not the same, but it's fairly close there. Euphrates flows out of Turkey and goes down through the northern edge of Syria and then down into the Shatt al-Arab waterway in Iraq. But in that part of the world, Genesis 15:18 says, on the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, to your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. So from the Nile, which is the river of Egypt, to the river Euphrates, this land was given by God to Abraham. Now that is known as Greater Israel. Now today we have these useful idiots walking around the streets yelling from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. It's a bunch of hooey. First place, God never promised the Palestinians anything from any river to any sea, but that would simply mean the destruction and the erasing of modern-day Israel and the Jews, at least in that part of the world. The true promise that was given was from the river to the river. And this author here, let me see, this is written January 8th, and I think this is it's maybe from the Washington Post, I'm not sure. I should have written that down. It says, the greater concept of Israel, noising and threatening throngs march through our cities carrying placards and chanting a rhythmic call in response to the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. For those with any kind of historical antenna and who want to listen, there is a much deeper chant, which is from the river to the river, Israel shall be free. So that's more resonant, and it is more biblically correct because God promised that land very clearly to Abraham. It says it is the chant calling for the restoration of Greater Israel. So when Israel put their soldiers and their military establishment on Mount Hermon, they can see Greater Israel. This is the dominant military place It says, we own this. This is what God gave us. And they could proclaim their ownership from the Euphrates River to the Nile from the top of Mount Hermon. Now, Americans don't understand that for the most part, but the average Arab in the Middle East does. Let me repeat that. The average Arab in the Middle East understands from the river to the river belongs to Israel, to the Jews, and to the descendants of Abraham, and that Israel putting their military up there essentially is saying, guess what, guys, this is what we're going to do. So it has put fear into the minds of many, many over there that Israel's trying to conquer the entire area that they were promised by God and establish that as modern day Israel. And the way they have been so successful militarily it has just simply been astounding. Considering where they were on October 7th, a year and a half ago, with the Hamas killing 1,400 of their people and just making almost a worldwide embarrassment of their security systems. And then they have essentially wiped out Hamas. They have, in an incredible attack, Hezbollah was so much more strong, 160,000 soldiers, whatever, and massive amounts of artillery and missiles. And when the Israelis took them on, destroyed all of their communications with their walkie-talkies and pagers, killed thousands of them without ever losing a man. And then, of course, they started taking some of the land. And then, of course, the many, many, many precision strikes that essentially took out all the leadership of Hamas and of Hezbollah. And now, of course, with Syria, who was Hezbollah's support and enabled Hezbollah to survive, being gone, a lot of the people in the Middle East now understand that the Israelis are not going to be defeated militarily, but they have this hatred because of their religion and their beliefs, and so who knows what's going to happen. But let me continue to read here. This promise is inscribed indelibly on the minds and unconscious behaviors. It is the specter of greater Israel from the river to the river, that is from the river Euphrates to the river Nile and all the land in between. It is not a divine promise in the strict sense, but a covenantal commitment, a legal claim and title to all the lands between the two rivers. It is a deed that has been witnessed and sealed by all of humankind. The granting of this title, immortally and in perpetuity, to Abraham and his progeny through Isaac and Jacob is permanent and irrevocable. The granting of Abraham's title is repeated and repeated in various forms and language throughout the Pentateuch and functions accordingly as a defining motive of the biblical books. We've read the description about the land title in Genesis 15 and verse 18 and elsewhere, and we all understand its meaning. It is a birthright and a land grant to all of the Abrahamic people. It is embedded in all the subsequent New Testament books and also mentioned in the Quran. There are no theological convolutions, argumentative gymnastics, or intellectual casuistry that can withdraw this claim. Then he makes the statement, it is the most permanent and final title ever granted, or will be granted, to humankind. There is, in fact, no stronger claim to any piece of property in the world than Judah's claim to the Holy Land from the Euphrates to the Nile. The expression Greater Israel in secular popular discourse has, however, come to mean very different things to different groups. To people in Israel, in the diaspora today, the term Greater Israel has largely grown to convey a very restricted idea of extending Israel's sovereignty to the West Bank and the Jordan River, which of course happened in 67 when they were able to conquer that part of the world in the 67 war, that part of the territory. And then in 74, also with taking of East Jerusalem. But it's that this is the idea of Greater Israel is largely understood by the idea that Israel contains everything, basically Syria, Lebanon, and Israel today, all the way down to the Nile River, is understood by contemporary Palestinians. Not all Arab or Zionists, both Jewish and Christian Zionists, understand the expression of Greater Israel in this sense. However, many of us understand Greater Israel to mean exactly what is described in the Bible. And so there is a fear that Israel is now on the march. They have completely destroyed their enemy's ability to make war. And there are some who feel they simply are going to occupy everything from the Nile to the Euphrates. I would doubt that, considering American influence and European influence and the other nations of the earth. But who knows what could happen? We do live in strange times. It says Theodor Herzl's vision was also a very modern vision. Technologically speaking, it was considerably ahead of its time. He envisioned a land interconnected with fast elevated railways and that extended across the Levant to the Ottoman Empire and into Europe. So Theodor Herzl had a much bigger vision than just establishing Zionism in the land of Israel. He wanted it to be modern, connected to Europe and various other things. Let's go on down here. This was the fevered, conspiratorially minded obsession for generations of Arab politicians and leaders. It is to this very day a preoccupation to a considerable extent Israel, and particularly the political concept of a greater Israel, that is, from the river to the river, is an ongoing and chronic obsession to the Arab world. In other words, he said this is an ongoing and chronic obsession that these Arabs have. They are so worried about Israel establishing itself from the Nile to the Euphrates. The Zionist presumed plan to conquer the entire Middle East and to occupy the historical biblical lands was certainly a defining part of the paranoid mindset of the Nazi-inclined Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Husseini. Some of you may be familiar with the Mufti of Jerusalem, this al-Husseini guy that was in a very close relationship with Hitler, and he carried out many murders of Jews and tried to get the Jews completely kicked out of the Middle East during World War II. Of course, he was on the losing side, so that didn't help his cause any. But a venal and diabolical figure, if there ever was one, it was the Mufti's existential dread and fear of greater Israel that inspired his well-received mission, a near-permanent ambassadorship to Berlin, and his fateful meeting and subsequent friendship with Adolf Hitler and other Nazis, including Adolf Eichmann and Joseph Goebbels. The Mufti's vision of an expansionist, militaristic Zionist Gorgon fell in the sympathetic ears of the Führer. And of course, the Führer didn't like the idea of Israel having a land in the Middle East. So he goes on to say here that he, along with the Golden Square conspirators, seized power in a Nazi coup in April 1941. It was the same specter of sinister Zionist ambitions and a greater Israel that endlessly obsessed Egyptian leader Gamal Abdel Nasser. And of course, he's the one that launched the Six-Day War in 1967. He launched that by closing off the trade to Aqaba and the Sharm el-Sheikh for Israel, which was an act of war. And he was a great political figure of his time. He gave some people some Arab messianic hope, but he had this obsession with preventing greater Israel. So it says that led to the debacle of the Six-Day War and the greater Israel specter seeking territorial expansion that was also prominently the core of semi-fascist National Socialist Ba'athist thinking. So even the Ba'ath Party, which of course we know Saddam Hussein and I think Bashar al-Assad were sort of part of, that also had that same thinking. Muammar Gaddafi was worried that Israel was going to take over his land, which was crazy. They didn't want Libya, but he thought that. So anyway, the Muslim Brotherhood and its 100 million strong followers today are fixated on this idea of preventing a greater Israel from taking place. Turkey's authoritarian Recep Tayyip Erdogan slips into these same paranoid rants of an expansionist greater Israel. So even Erdogan, this leader of Turkey, who is, I think, suspect in a lot of ways, has used that same expression. Let me see here. It says here that in his doctoral thesis, he mentioned about the bizarre inversion of title relationship between Zionists and Nazis during the 1940s. For the Arab leaders and the major powers, it's not feasible that the current fight is about a slim sliver of sand in Gaza, but it is instead about the concept of greater Israel being established. So it is a much bigger war in their mind than it is in the minds of us, meaning us. We Americans don't have quite the background. They don't have quite the understanding of what the real conflict is about or where it is going to eventually end. I want to start that right now over in Genesis chapter 29. I want to do a little bit of a study here and kind of refresh some of our memories of some of these scriptures that apply to what's going on in the Middle East today. If we don't have the background of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the sons of Jacob, and what happened to them and the promises that were given, we're not going to be able to see clearly when these events take place. Genesis chapter 29, I want to begin in verse 31. The Lord saw that Leah was unloved, and he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. So as you know, Jacob had these two wives and these two handmaidens. But the first wife that was given to him was in a deceitful way, but Jacob had deceived his father, so now he gets deceived by his father-in-law. But Leah was his first wife. She, 7 days later, he married Rachel. But Leah conceived and bore a son. And of course, bearing a son was kind of their purpose that gave them a real step up in life. He called his name Reuben, for she said, the Lord has surely looked on my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me. Then she conceived again and bore a son, and said, because the Lord has heard that I am unloved, he has given me his son, another son. And his name was Simeon. So Reuben was first, Simeon was born second. And she conceived again and bore a son, and said, this time my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. And his name was called Levi. These were all sons of Leah. And she conceived again and bore a son, and said, now I will praise the Lord. She is celebrating. She is praising the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah, and then she stopped off bearing. So Judah was the 4th son of Leah. Judah was a cause of celebration. She called his name praise. But what happened to these 4 sons, though, is important, because Reuben, as you know, defiled his father's marriage, or handmaiden, and so he lost it. He lost the birthright that God had promised Abraham, Isaac, and then to Jacob, and then Jacob had to pass it down. Simeon and Levi had proven at least twice offensive to their father. So this was passed on now. This part of the birthright, it was a 2-part birthright, was passed on to Judah. Let's go over to Genesis chapter 49. Genesis chapter 49, beginning in verse 1. Jacob called his sons and said, gather together that I may tell you what will befall you in the last days. Now, we've read this chapter a lot. We know a lot about what it talks about. But Jacob is in Egypt. He's dying. And he is telling his sons what will happen to their descendants in the last days, the times in which we live. We believe that Jesus Christ is going to come. And he says, listen to your father. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength. In other words, Reuben was the firstborn. He should have had the inheritance of the scepter. He should have been the ruling king, because the rulership is always passed on from the father to the firstborn son. So he says, you're my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity and the excellency of power. It's pretty nice things to say about this guy named Reuben, your firstborn son. Excellent in dignity, excellent in power, beginning of strength, strength and might. But he says, you're unstable as water. You shall not excel. Now that's interesting. Unstable as water. You shall not excel. It says, because you went up to your father's bed, then you defile it, and he went up to my couch. So in other words, he was immoral, he was adulterous, and he lost the blessing from his father. Now, just as a little interesting sidelight, this type of thing still happens. I heard on the news today that President-elect Trump has basically passed over his oldest son, Donald Trump Jr., and made in his will or decree that the vast majority of his company will go to his Barron, his 6'9" younger son. And the reason was because Donald Trump Jr. has been extremely promiscuous and immoral. And I think he just ended the relationship with one of these info babes from CNN News or from Fox News, whatever it was. But at any rate, it still happens today. What happens here is still going on. Fathers are still offended by their sons' immoral behavior and can then essentially write them out of the will and go on to a next son if they want to. But he says, Simon, let's go on down to verse 5. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Instruments of cruelty are they in their dwelling place. Now, the sons of Heth that they had killed were trying to breed the Israelites out of existence. And they even said, everything they have, we will get, if they can have their sons marry our daughters marry their sons. So what they did was essentially right in protecting their family. but it was not done in the right way, obviously. And so he said, Simeon and Levi are brothers, instruments of cruelty are they in their dwelling place. Let not my soul enter their council, let not my honor be united to their assembly. So they don't get to receive the honor either. For in their anger they slew a man, and their self-will they hamstrung an ox. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and in their wrath it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. So Simeon and Levi have been scattered through Israel, although there are many who feel that the Scottish people are Simeonites. And they are pretty much been known for being, good warriors and cruel and very physically adept, short in stature, but very good acrobats and very good, and that kind of thing. But anyway, they are scattered in Jacob. And then we get to Leah's fourth son, Judah. What is said about Judah? Judah, you are he whom brothers shall praise. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. I wonder if the Hezbollah fighters and the Hamas fighters read this before they attacked modern-day Jews in Israel, that your hand shall be on the neck, which means you're basically strangling them, of your enemies. Your father's children shall bow down before you. So your brothers will bow down before you. Judah is a lion's whelp, a lion's cub. In other words, the lion is the king of beasts. It can basically conquer or kill any other beast it wants. So Judah is a lion's whelp. In other words, he's very powerful. He has claws. He has teeth. He's very adept in fighting. He says, when the prey, my son, you have gone up, he bows down. He lies down as a lion. The lion lies down. He's kind of like, I don't care who else is around here. I'm tough. They can lie down. They can come around all they want to. As a lion, who shall rouse him? Nobody's going to rouse him. It says, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh comes. Now, that was after it was established. The first king of Israel was actually from Benjamin. He was not from Judah. That was Saul. And he did not, of course, last. The first king that God himself had anointed and made king, David, to replace Saul, was of Judah. So until Shiloh, or until Jesus Christ comes, the Savior comes, and to him shall be the obedience of his people. It says, binding his donkey to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine, he washed his garments in wine and his clothes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, his teeth are whiter than milk. In other words, Judah would be blessed, and he would also control vines, control perhaps battles. Maybe the vine, the blood here talks about as a type of grapes. So Judah was given a special blessing that was passed over from the three older brothers. Now let's go to Isaiah chapter 9. Isaiah chapter 9. This one you're very familiar with. The wording is very similar about what we had just read. And this, of course, from the feast is about the Messiah coming. Isaiah chapter 9. Let's begin in verse 6. It says, unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder. His name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And of the increase of his government there will be no end, upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, to order it and establish it with judgment and justice, from that time forward even forever. So when this Savior comes, the establishing of his kingdom will be forever, and the zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform it. The Lord sent a word against Jacob, and it has fallen in Israel. So we have this promise of this Savior coming through the line of Judah. So Judah had the blessing of Shiloh coming through him, and also of having the scepter, or the birthright of the people of Israel. And of course, he was to be a very powerful fighter. Even in Revelation chapter 5, Christ is called the Lion of Judah. In other words, the conquering, dominant animal or being of all of Judah. I want to go now over to Numbers chapter 24. Numbers chapter 24. This, as you know, is Balaam's pronouncement about Israel. And of course, Balaam was recruited by Balak to be able to say a curse on Israel, and God would let him. You're all familiar with the story of the talking donkey and all of that. So, chapter 24 and verse 1 of Numbers, let's start there. Says, now when Balaam saw that it pleased the Lord to bless Israel, he did not go as at other times to seek to use sorcery, but set his face towards the wilderness. And Balaam raised his eyes and saw Israel encamped according to their tribes. Now the way they were camped, Judah had the number one position. Judah was to the east, and I think it was Zebulun and Issachar next to him. I'm going from bad memory here. But Judah was on the east, and when they all 12 tribes marched around the tabernacle, and tabernacle was the middle, 3 tribes in the front, 3 tribes in the back, and they transversed around the wilderness, Judah led them. Judah was the number one tribe. They were the tribe they had to leave. It says, verse 2, Balaam raised his eyes, saw Israel encamped according to their tribes, and the Spirit of the God came upon him. He took this oracle and said, the utterance of Balaam, the son of Beor, the utterance of the man whose eyes are open, the utterance of him who hears the words of God, and seeks the wisdom of the Almighty, who falls down with eyes open. How lovely are your tents, O Jacob, your dwellings, O Israel, like valleys that stretch out, like gardens by the riverside, like aloes planted by the Lord, like cedars beside the waters. He shall pour water from his buckets, and his seed shall be in many waters. His king shall be higher than Agag. His kingdom shall be exalted. God brings him out of Egypt. He has a strength like a wild ox. He shall consume the nations, his enemies. He shall consume the nations that are his enemies, and break their bones, and pierce them with his arrows. He bows down and lies down as a lion. Again, another picture of Judah being a lion that lies down in control and is content. As a lion, who shall rouse him? Same question that's asked before. Blessed is he who blesses you, and cursed is he who curses you. Now, the Jews believe this, that they are blessed who bless Israel or bless them. Now, of course, they don't have God's covenant today in the same way. They've abrogated their national covenant, which he made with them later. But we have Balaam's pronouncement here that is very important, that we have the lion pictured for Judah and for the rulership of Judah. I want to go over to 1 Kings now. Let's go to 1 Kings. I can see I'm going to have time for about half of this. I don't know why I do this to myself all the time. Never have enough, way too much material. 1 Kings chapter 7. So the lion, which by the way is a symbol of the British Empire, but in 1 Kings, it is also a symbol of Solomon's temple, Solomon's throne, and I believe it is decoration even on, do we have record of that decoration of David's palace? I don't know, maybe not. Okay, 1 Kings chapter 7, let's look in verse 29. It says, on the panels that were between the frames were lions, oxen, and cherubim. Lions, oxen, and cherubim. So here we have these animals that were basically for the temple. This is talking about the bronze work that was on the outside of the temple for decoration. There were also bronze carts, but they had the panels that were the panels between these frames. They had pictures or engravings of lions and of oxen and of cherubim. Of course, cherubim are God's supernatural protectors of his throne. And oxen, of course, simply means the oxen of Bashan. There symbolizes blessings from God. And, of course, these lions, which is power. It's repeated down in in verse 36. On the plates of its flanges, on its panels, he engraved cherubim, lions, and palm trees, wherever there was a clear space on each, with wreaths all around. So here we have the temple implements, and we have these carts, and they had engraved cherubim, lions, and palm trees on them. But over in chapter 10, just over a couple pages in your Bible, chapter 10 and verse 19, we find that Solomon's throne had lions on each side. So he sat between two huge, probably gold-covered lions. 1 Kings chapter 10 and verse 19. The throne had 6 steps. Well, first, verse 18 says the king made a throne of ivory and overlaid it with pure gold. So this was not cheap. This was not a Walmart special. This was very, very expensive, fine craftsmanship. The throne had 6 steps, and the top of the throne was round at the back. So it was rounded off at the back. There were armrests on either side of the place of the seat, and 2 lions stood beside the armrests. So Solomon's throne had a big round back to it, all ivory covered in pure gold. And he was sitting there, it had armrests, and he had lions on the outside of those armrests. So when Jesus Christ is called the Lion of Judah, and Judah's picture is a lion, it really is a picture of what God essentially intended and what he had blessed for them. So also want to mention, let's go over to Judges chapter 1, that Judah was the tribe that led Israel in battle when they conquered the promised land. Judah was the one who basically led Israel in battle, and that was at God's direction. When God said that, inspired Jacob to say that he had the throat of his enemies. It's interesting, you read, we might have time to read some of them, but King David had 37 men of valor. The greatest one was a man named Benaiah, but they were men who accomplished in battle some incredible things. They defeated hundreds of enemy. They accomplished, they could run hundreds of miles. It seems like you read what they did, and you wonder if these guys were Superman on steroids. They weren't even human, but they were David's great men of battle. And most of them were, I think the original group were all from Judah, but there were also some others from Gad and others who joined with him. The book of Judges, let's start in verse 1, chapter 1. It came to pass after the death of Joshua that the children of Israel asked the Lord. So, in other words, Joshua was no longer making these military decisions. Now it was time for God, through the Urim and the Thummim and through the priests, to tell the leaders of Israel what to do. So Israel asked the Lord, saying, who shall be first to go up and fight the Canaanites for us? Because the land was not entirely conquered. Some of the land some was settled, but there were still many areas left to be conquered, especially by the Israelites. The Lord said, Judah shall go up. Indeed, I have delivered the land into his hand. So Judah said to Simeon, his brother, so he knew who the fighters were, Judah did. He said, come with me to my allotted territory, that we may fight against the Canaanites. I will likewise go with you. And of course he did, and Judah went up, and they found Adonai Bezek, and Bezek just means the king of Bezek. Adonai means king or lord, so the king of Bezek. And they fought against him, and they defeated him, and they brought him to Jerusalem. Jerusalem, they conquered it temporarily, but it was taken back over by the Jebusites, and then later David had to go conquer it again. Verse 9, the children of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites who dwell in the mountains to the south, and they went against the Canaanites who dwelt in Hebron. And there they killed a number of people. It mentions there. And then Caleb, of course, was given that responsibility of taking the town of Hebron, which is where the cave of Machpelah, the graves of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their wives are even today. So Othniel, the son of Kenaz, they got to mention him because he has a son later that is important in the story of these great warriors. So we have here the judges, or Judah is chosen to fight. And let's go to chapter 20 in the book of Judges, for once again, Judah is the tribe that is chosen to lead the battle, to lead the fight. And you can see why God says they are great warriors and great fighters. And if you look at the almost unbelievable, unmatched military accomplishments of the modern state of Israel in the last year and a half, I guess you would say, since October 7, 2023. It is monumental in the history of the world, almost what that little tiny nation has done in conquering two of their 4 adversaries. There's rumors now that the Houthis are next, and then who knows what will happen when President Trump takes office about the nation of Iran, which is the head of the snake, the axis of evil, and no longer has its proxy Hezbollah, or at least why it's Hezbollah is greatly reduced, and so is Hamas. So the report I got today from Yair Pinto that I saw a few minutes before the broadcast was that this war is expanding at a rapid rate. It is expanding across the Middle East, which to many people there means Israel is going to reestablish greater Israel. And that is something we need to watch out for. Because there's going to be reaction to it, but what is in God's plans for that part of the world? We know eventually what it is, but in the meantime, it's preparation for the Great Tribulation, it's preparation for the King of the North coming down and occupying it. But in Judges chapter 20 and verse 18, the children of Israel arose and went up to the house of God to inquire of God. And they said, which of us shall go up first to battle against the children of Benjamin? The Lord said, Judah first. This is when Benjamin had killed the Levite's concubine and all the things that happened that were pretty bad. And maybe part of the reason is because the Israelites, the Jews and Benjamin were kind of close, and certainly they had territory that was adjacent, and they may have been instrumental in allowing a number of the Benjaminites to survive. So interesting about Judah was he was the one who saved Joseph from the pit in Genesis chapter 37, when the other brothers wanted to leave him there to die or kill him first. He said, no, just leave him here. And then, of course, he came back and tried to save him, but he was already gone. He's also the one that took over, and this is kind of interesting. Let's go back to Genesis 38. Judah was the one that then took the leadership in Genesis 38 with taking the 3 trips they took to Egypt to get food. But in dealing with Joseph, who they didn't know was Joseph, but he was the one in dealing with the Egyptian, Judah was the natural leader of these 11 men. It came to pass at that time, Genesis 38 and verse 1, that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adulamite whose name was, this is Judah wrongs Tamar. This wasn't the best encounter that we wanted. He did confess that he had done something wrong, though. Verse 26, basically he says, Judah acknowledged them and said, she has been more righteous than I. So perhaps some commentaries say he repented or apologized. So I don't know. We will see if that's the case. But he pledged himself to Jacob in Genesis 43. So just over a couple of chapters, Genesis 43. We find that Judah pledged himself as the surety for Jacob. And he says, and this is starting in verse 3, Judah spoke to him, saying, the man solemnly warned us, saying, you shall not see my face unless my brother is with you. And then verse 8, Judah said to Israel, his father, send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you and our little ones. I myself will be surety for him. So Judah takes the leadership position here of these 11 brothers, and basically tells his father, I will be surety for that young man Benjamin, that he's going over there and he's going to be coming back. So I won't mention all the mighty men of David, but he had these 37 warriors that did incredible things. They're listed in 2 Samuel 23. It's an interesting read, and all the things these 37 men did. Right now I want to read a little section in the time we have left out of Joseph's scepter and Judah's birthright. Judah's scepter and Joseph's birthright. I can say that. By H.J. Allen. He has a lot of the same information that we have in our and the church publications have had for many, many years with our United States and Britain in Prophecy and America and Britain in Prophecy booklets. Chapter 1 says, although it is not generally known, it is nevertheless true that God made 2 covenants with Abraham, or rather he made one with Abram and later with a man whose name was changed to Abraham. It was with the same man, but the 2 covenants are different. This change of name was made in that it might harmonize with the new character and the new order of things as they pertain to the covenant man. First, Abram, a covenant was made with him when he was 90 years old. The second, to Abraham, a covenant was not made until this man called upon the one to make one great sacrifice of his life, which of course was with his son Isaac. The text of the first of these covenants is as follows. When Abraham was 90 years old and 9, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am the Almighty God, walk before me and be perfect, and I will make my covenant between me and you and multiply you exceedingly. And Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, as for me, behold, my covenant was with you, and you shall be a father of many nations. So father of many nations was what Abram was promised. But thy name shall be Abraham, for a father of many nations I have made you. And I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and make nations of you, and kings shall come out of you. And I will establish my covenant between me and you, and your seed after you, and their generations forever, for an everlasting covenant. That's Genesis chapter 17, by the way. I will give unto you and to your seed after you the land wherein you are a stranger, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. We see at once the great feature of this covenant is multiplicity of seed for a man that hitherto had been childless. And this multitude of people are to become not one great nation, not simply a plurality of nations, but a large plurality, many nations. And so the promise of many nations. The great majority of Bible students, and with most schools of biblical thought, the fact that the Lord, when making the covenant, promised Abram that he should become the father of more than one nation is entirely overlooked. In other words, they don't understand the difference between Judah and Israel, or the fact that there were many nations to come from Abraham. For the Lord not only promised Abraham that kings should come out of his loins, but when he reiterated the promises of this covenant to Sarai, the barren wife of Abraham, he said, she shall be the mother of nations, kings of people shall be of her. So the promise is also to Sarah and her seed. And so her name was changed to Sarah, princess, that she too might have a name which would be in harmony with her new character. For only a princess may be the mother of kings. Another special feature of this covenant is that there is a land consideration which involves the land of Canaan in an everlasting bond, not only of ownership, but of possession. Evidently, the everlasting possession of that land is by its lawful heirs. For it says, and he hadn't inherited yet, he had to live there as basically as a stranger in the land. Another feature of this covenant is that it is wholly unconditional. That is, the Lord has promised, irrespective of the moral and spiritual character of the people themselves. So there's increase in posterity of the Abrahamic lineage shall become all the covenant promises. Now, the Lord said he swore by himself. This was not an agreement between two parties. God simply said, I will swear by myself. The two parties involved are God the Father and God the Father. Could be God the Son, but you know what I mean, is that God is the only party making this promise, and he made it unconditional. It's not based on the behavior of another party in the covenant. Whereas the promises to Israel later were. They had to obey his rules, Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 28, or they would go into captivity. Centuries after the giving of this covenant, when the Abrahamic posterity was quite numerous, and while they were still together as one nation, the Lord made a covenant with them which was conditional, but they broke faith with him and violated its specified conditions. Since it is true that in contradicting or these conditional covenants, there is both a party of the first and a party of the second, and the law is that when either party breaks the conditions, the other is not held. Bound by them, hence the covenant people broke their part of the covenant. God was no longer bound. He says, they continued not in my covenant, and I regarded them not. The second covenant which God made with Abraham was not made until many years after the first, and was made at a time when Abraham had just offered his only son, Isaac, who at the first of the promise of many as a sacrifice in obedience to the command of him who produced that son, and by his creative power from that which was good as dead, as an expression of faith in the resurrective power of that same covenant-making God. So the fact that Abraham had a miraculous son was a proof of God's resurrective or ability to resurrect people when they are dead. It says, it is recorded as follows, and the angel of the Lord called unto Abraham the second time and said, by myself I have sworn, says the Lord, for because you have done this thing, and have not withheld your son, your only son, that in blessing I will bless you, multiplying I'll multiply your seed as the stars of heaven, as the sand which is upon the seashore, and your seed shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So here we have this blessing from God to Abraham, and it includes this land, but then it also includes the blessing of many nations. And of course, we have this promise that is continuing. And there's two parts here, the scepter and the birthright. And we've had some studies on that. It might be good to go through that during our next Bible study. Well, with that, we are out of time, but I want to thank everyone for watching. I would admonish you to watch what's going on in the Middle East. This war is expanding. It is not coming to an end. The power of Israel is being demonstrated, and they feel they have the wind at their back now with President Trump being elected. Certainly our current president has virtually disappeared from the landscape other than, issuing lots of pardons to criminals, many of whom should obviously stay in the drink or in the slammer. But that's his option as president. So anyway, watch what's happening. The world's changing rapidly before our eyes, and there are also rumblings over in China that China may be wanting to attack Taiwan. But that's Taiwan and China, they're not the focus of Bible prophecy. Jerusalem, Mount Zion, and that part of the world that is dominated by Mount Hermon is. And the Israelis today have taken possession of that and have set up their dominance up there, and they're saying that the world has changed now and we're in charge over here. So we'll certainly wait and see what happens. All right, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see everyone next time.